Welcome to the Tribe of the Restored Warrior podcast, where coming home changed doesn't mean you're broken.
Welcome to another episode of the Tribe of the Restored Warrior. I'm Justin, and I'm joined by Dr. Ben Yost, and today we're going to talk about when traumatic things happen or when the shit hits the fan.
All right, yeah. So I think with this topic, it's really, really important to kind of go through, what that qualifies as. In the first responder world, they call it critical incidents a lot, but that isn't the only territory that we're talking about. It can be those major life events, death of a loved one, close friend getting, very sick or passing away. Any of those situations that can put us back into the traumas we experienced before, during our time as a first responder or during combat deployments, or can create those brand new traumas altogether. With it, I think it's important that we don't try to qualify exactly what that is, because it could be different for each person. There's our obvious things: officer-involved shootings, bad deployment, getting hit by roadside bombs, losing a buddy of yours, very, very serious firefight where you got to put somebody down. All sorts of things, are that obvious territory. But then there's those less obvious ones, right? And it could be dealing with a family member who's sick for a prolonged period of time, knowing that bad things are going to possibly happen there. Someone might pass away. That is a traumatic situation. It could be different at different times of your life. I know I've talked about this before in the classes that I do. A child death call as a first responder always sucked, right? But when I was a young police officer, it sucked and I felt bad for the family. And then when I was older and I had kids of my own and that kid was in the age range of my kids, I really felt that, emotionally, as compared to just being there and feeling that it sucked and trying to do a good job as a first responder. And this can look like a lot of different things. I mean, when we experience these types of things, at first, it can be surreal. It can even be exciting, right? It could be that feeling of, this is what I've been training for, or it can be overwhelming for the person, depending on what area of life they're being affected in. If it's their personal life, it could very quickly be overwhelming. If it's a professional life, they may get that excitement. But from that, there's really no right or wrong way to feel. It could be a mixture of all of them. And then in the aftermath, there are a lot of things that come through. The person could be numb, right? They could even feel a sense of pride that they did a good job at doing their job, right? Spend how much time on the range, and then you get into a firefight and you win, right? So that person they may feel a mixture of pride, like, hey, I won, I got through that. But at the same time, then sadness kicks in. All this mixture of emotions is completely normal. How about you? Well, what type of thoughts have you had when you experience things like that?
I'd say for me, in the moment, you don't really think too much about what's happening. You just you do. And I always kind of really did well in high stress situations like that. And it wasn't until later when, I almost look at it as when you're in it, you're fine. But when you're removed from it, that's when some of the issues started to pop up for me. The anxieties and things like that started to show itself when I was finally removed from that environment.
Right. And that's very, very normal. Very, very normal. A lot of first responders and veterans will do fine when we're working. We'll do fine when we're deployed because we're still up, right? We're still up. We're still functioning at that high level of frostiness as it is. And there's delayed onset with a lot of these things. That is very, very normal. The thing with that, the processing of it, is it's going to take time. And generally, it needs to be done outside of that dangerous environment, right? So processing of it really can't be done while the person's still deployed. It really should never be done while the person's still deployed or still actively working a shift, but it's that off time. It's that off time that processing really needs to be done in. And again, the onset could be delayed. It could be years down the line, another incident happens or a reminder happens, and then wham, it starts to hit the person. Within that, it is also completely normal to not feel not normal after that. Within it, that new normal is kind of what's expected. And that new normal generally is, and I know our listeners will understand, you're going to understand this statement. Sometimes that shock is the realization that this is the world. This is the world we live in. Mm-hmm. And that we've been walking around, especially in the first responder world, because you're seeing it in your backyard, but also within the deployment. You return back to the world and you see everything in a different light because you see how bad things can get. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of realization there, you realize it's always been there and we've just been kind of insulated from it. And now we see it. And that can be pretty tough at first. Do you experience the same kind of thing?
Oh, absolutely. Challenging times were, for me, was the transition back home and realizing that I was different now than the society I left, and how a lot of times people are just very naive to the world around them. I find that being an experience I have on a regular basis. Through work or personal interaction, a lot of times people just don't have a clue.
Yeah. I experience the exact same thing, man. The exact same thing. And that's where it really becomes important to link up with other veterans and first responders. I know we hammer this, but we aren't, and it's right in our intro thing, we aren't broken. We're different. We're different than before, but that's perfectly okay. And the reality is we are different because we've seen what we've seen, and we're in a society where we actually protect all the other people from the bad things, right? So they're not going to understand. They're not going to understand, but we understand. And that's where linking up with each other is so, so important, and doing it in a healthy way where it doesn't involve all the tough, inappropriate coping mechanisms that get us in trouble. So that return, then it's important to talk about in some of these situations, you got to go back to being a first responder again, or you might have to go on another deployment and you might be dreading it. Right. And that anxiety is completely normal. So it's important to be patient with ourselves in the process of that and understand that we're going to have anxiety because we're now returning to do a job that we now know how bad it can get, right? So there's an anxiety there. It's like getting back on a bike after you fell off the bike, right? You know that some bad things can happen. So be patient with ourselves when we're doing that. Talk with our trusted peers about that, because we can help each other through it because we're active in these fields, right? And where do we get to the point where we need to get help? That's important to talk about. So one, substances. If substances are becoming our coping, that's the time that we really should probably get help before it turns into something way worse, right? On top of that, if our behavior is causing issues at home, right? Or issues at work, like if we're starting to isolate, if we're starting to really not be able to control our on and off switch anymore, right? If we're running into issues where we are flipping out at work, or we just are extremely suspicious of everybody at work. I've seen that too, where now everything at work sucks. Everybody's out to get me. Same thing can happen in the personal life. Those issues are starting to happen, or the biggies, the serious thoughts of suicide or homicide, right? If those are happening and you're starting to plan things out and you're starting to romance these ideas, it's time to get some help. And it's time to get some help from a culturally competent therapist. And again, that doesn't mean you're broken either. It doesn't mean like it's the end of the road, right? It just means, hey, I'm spiked right now and I need some help coming back down, right? And learning some new coping and thriving skills in the process of that is really, really important. What do you think?
Well, I think that all that is extremely important. Having that self-awareness, I think, is one of the things we're trying to get people to understand about themselves. So they pick up on these warning signs before they get to these points of substance, abuse, and suicidality starts becoming like a good idea.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, brother. Well, I think we've covered this topic pretty good.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. So remember, no feeling is the wrong feeling. Processing it takes time. Return can cause anxiety. And get help from a professional and stay connected. And thank you for listening to another episode of the Tribe of the Restored Warrior. Tribe of the Restored Warrior works in collaboration and contributes to Vets and Badges, where real-life heroes share their trials and tribulations. Please check out www.vetsandbadges.com for more information.